Thank you for joining us for our session today, Preparing Music Teachers to Support Students with Special Education Needs in Elementary General Music. My name is Mara Culp, and I'm an Assistant Professor of Music Teaching and Learning at the Eastman School of Music in New York in the United States.
And I'm Karen Salvador, and I'm the chair of the music education area at the College of Music at Michigan State University, which is also in the United States.
In this session, we plan to offer research-supported strategies for use with pre-service music educators, situate suggestions among intersections of special education needs, gender, location, race, ethnicity, and socioeconomic status. We will also synthesize common facets of asset-based pedagogies and illustrate how music teacher educators can present domain-specific strategies to help pre-service educators proactively plan for a variety of student needs.
In the United States, elementary general music educators usually teach all children in a school, including those with special education needs. Many music educators report feelings of discomfort, uncertainty, or underpreparedness. This is not surprising because music educators do not always take specialized coursework on working with students who have diverse abilities. And if pre-service music educators in the US encounter music content-specific information about working with students who have special education needs, it is nearly always in their elementary methods course. But this course may not be required for all teacher candidates. In elementary general music methods courses, research indicates the bulleted items on the slide and exposure to young children are crucial experiences. Specifically, purposeful integration of intersectionality and disability topics in courses through reflective exercises and journals, content-specific strategies, and fieldwork are crucial. Regarding fieldwork, Conway noted that pre-service fieldwork is useful only if it's organized in a way that allows students to learn something specific from the context. Next slide, please. In my methods courses, I introduced the topic of students with special education needs by offering three possible framings for disability. First, the medical model, in which disability is situated in the body and defined by deviation from medical standards or social norms. Then, the social model, which posits that disability is fluid, not binary, and culturally and socially constructed. Impairment is only disability when society makes it that way. In naming disability as fluid, the social model reminds us that we will all experience disability at some point in our lives, and the children we teach also sometimes move in and out of being identified as disabled. Finally, in the biopsychosocial model, disability is a minoritized identity that results from complex interactions among impairment, society, and individual response, or psychology. Special education services in the United States are grounded in a medical model and treat disability as a deviation located in a child that should be fixed. The social and biopsychosocial models challenge educators to consider how schools create disabling conditions, and this leads directly to introducing students to universal designs for learning. These framings help pre-service teachers examine behavior and interactions and conceptualize ways to meet individual student needs.
Recognizing the problematic nature of imposed labels, we also want to honor individual identity and preferences. For the purposes of our discussion, a child with a disability will refer to individuals who self-identify in that way or who have been identified with a disability by a school district and receive special education services. So when talking about disability in educational context, it is often used as the sole determinant, if you will, the only characteristic under investigation or for conversation. However, intersectionality calls us to look more broadly at other characteristics of the student's lived experience and identities. We draw on the work of Collins and Crenshaw as we look toward intersectionality. More specifically, we wanted to share a conceptualization from Collins that guides our work. The term intersectionality references the critical insight that race, class, gender, sexuality, ethnicity, nation, ability, and age operate not as unitary, mutually exclusive entities, but as reciprocally constructing phenomena that in turn shape complex social inequalities. Therefore, we need to look at multiple facets of human identity when we are thinking about how to meet learners' needs. In this presentation, we looked at multiple facets of child's identity in addition to disability. So we wanted to unpack a couple of these connections for you. Scholars have encouraged examining disability using an intersectional lens. And when we think about gender, we want to say outright in the US that gender is often researched and conceptualized in terms of male-female gender binaries. And when we look at gender, we note a higher percentage of males receive special education services, and also the disproportionality of males identified with disabilities in the United States educational system. In terms of race and ethnicity, there's also a relationship between identification in the United States, with certain races and ethnicities being more likely to be categorized across different disability categories. And social class or socioeconomic status has also been identified. However, in the United States, race is often correlated with socioeconomic status, and results of investigations where researchers examined multiple variables reveal that the effects of race may be attenuated among some disability categories when socioeconomic status is considered, as findings differ across studies. The last thing we want to note regarding location is that location can lead to disparities that exist between rural and city areas, for example, with implications for learners with disabilities. So when we look at these pieces in an intersectional way, we believe that it reveals implications for music teachers. So first, we believe it reveals the importance of practices that are ability responsive, gender inclusive, accessible, and culturally responsive. And when we use accessible in this context, what we mean is activities and experiences that are both affordable and presented in a way that does not require specialized knowledge and that makes people feel welcomed. We also believe that these findings implicate the need to use asset-based pedagogies.
Asset-based pedagogies focus on individual strengths to improve learning. Examples of asset-based pedagogies include universal design for learning, culturally sustaining pedagogies, and trauma-informed education. Looking across these asset-based pedagogies, we have identified some shared pillars for practice. We believe that it's important to work with our pre-service educators to help them know and value individual student experiences and goals by learning and caring about students' lives, previous experiences, musical goals, and interests. We think pre-service educators need to learn to build relationships with families and community by cultivating positive perspectives on caregiving structures in their myriad forms, recognizing family and student assets, and being involved in the community. Pre-service music educators must learn to honor student voice and provide choices, actively seeking to include student input and providing multiple ways students can participate in music. They need to establish firm, healthy boundaries that maintain high expectations by explicitly discussing and co-constructing behavioral and musical expectations, determining performance expectations based on standards of quality drawn from the cultural contexts of the musics teachers and their students select, and believing that students can achieve these outcomes. Finally, reshaping curriculum by continuously and proactively examining and adjusting practice, what is done, why it's done, how it's done, based on knowledge about students, families, the school's communities, and oneself to better serve learners. It's not inclusive practice if you invite somebody to something you're not willing to change. Finally, each of these strategies must be enacted with cultural humility, enacting power dynamics between the school and the communities they serve, engaging power dynamics between the school and the communities they serve, refusing to stereotype, and cultivating critical awareness of their own culture, resisting positioning it as neutral or the norm. Next slide, please. As we're building knowledge with pre-service educators regarding models of disability, the ways disability intersects with other identities, and asset-based pedagogies, students are concurrently engaged in fieldwork, video observation, and reflection. To illustrate some of the ways we do this, in the next 2 slides, we present a conceptual framework for how music teacher educators might help pre-service music educators consider domains of development to combine universal designs for learning with evidence-based scaffolding in order to create activities and lesson plans that are ability responsive, gender inclusive, accessible, and culturally responsive. The conceptual framework includes readings, discussion, strategies, and approaches, fieldwork, assignments, and reflections oriented around a particular domain of development.
So thank you for that wonderful introduction to this, Karen. I'm excited to talk with you all about this domain, which is students with communication needs in elementary general music. So I'm going to be sharing with you some information that I have used in my classes, but also some strategies I'm planning to use in my classes when I return. I've actually been on leave from my teaching for the last year. And so I'm excited to use some of these when I go back to teaching in the fall. So regarding readings, I tried to select examples that, again, I have used in my classroom or those that are really focused on elementary general music spaces and are also accessible to undergraduates. So either not behind paywalls or written in a way that don't require specialized knowledge to gain understandings from the readings. The first reading that I wanted to highlight is an article I actually wrote with Karen, Embracing Human Difference in Music Education, Suggestions for Honoring Diversity in Music Classrooms. This article is written in a very straightforward way. It's easy to understand. It's also not behind a paywall. It's accessible via the World Wide Web on the Music in a Minuet blog. The second article I wanted to highlight is one that I wrote with Elaine Bernstorff, who's the co-author of Music and Literacy Connection, entitled Working with Students with Specialized Communication Needs. Again, this is a very approachable article. It's only 2 pages long and really focuses on strategies that can be implemented right away in classrooms. The third reading by McAnally is General Music and Children Living in Poverty. So again, this is really focused on that general music space. And the final reading, Robeson and Culp, Promoting Gender Inclusivity in General Music, Considerations for Music Listening. This article also provides a framework for gender inclusivity in general music spaces specifically, and that's one of the reasons I want to recommend this particular work. It's also part of a series. Dr. Robeson and I actually wrote that work out of a need that we believed existed in the field to have more conversation about gender inclusivity specifically in elementary general spaces. So we wanted to provide something for general music teachers in that way. So those are the works I have used with my students or again plan to use because, as I said, I was on leave when a couple of these were published. So some discussion points. In the United States, the 4 skills that are often related to language are listening, speaking, reading, and writing. And so a conversation that we've had, in what ways are the 4 language skills similar to skills in music? Another discussion point, in what ways could these skills be subject to culture or gender biases? Regarding strategies and approaches, I wanted to share with you some things that are really quite simple, things that you can learn today or even just kind of realize today and use them immediately with your students. You might even say, oh, of course, once you see them. So the first strategy is simply providing options for nonverbal responses. Some really simple ways to do that include using 2 fists to show same and opening 1 hand to show different. You can do that with a variety of different movements depending on the bodies that are in the space that you have. Another way of doing that might be show me a 1 if you think this, show me a 2 if you think something else. You can wave scarves, you can bang on drums. There are just myriad ways of using nonverbal responses. Another very simple thing that you can do with your learners is face them when you speak to them. Now, this does not mean that you require eye contact from them. It just means that you face them when you speak to them because there's a lot of information that is lost when I turn away from my learners. So I encourage students, I encourage teachers, my students, to think about that, particularly when they're working at the board or something like that. Finally, interdisciplinary collaboration is a big one. In the United States, there are professionals who are specifically trained to work with learners with communication needs. So I strongly encourage my pre-service teachers to work with them. Another simple thing that's not on my slide, but bringing the information in slowly can also be helpful for learners with communication challenges. So it allows them to focus kind of on one thing at a time rather than seeing a lot at once. In terms of fieldwork, having your students work in classrooms with students with communication needs who are diverse in terms of social identities. So in addition to thinking about the quality of the music program, we want to think about the diversity of the students there in terms of their social identities and experiences, because we want our pre-service teachers to have opportunities to work with learners who are different from themselves and those who they might be teaching in the future. For assignments, you can ask students to learn songs from various cultures in sign language. This would also allow them an opportunity to understand that sign language is varied around the world and is also nuanced. Another assignment might be creating a demonstration video of a classroom instrument, perhaps the recorder, and posting it online and providing captions. Finally, in terms of reflections, I like to have my students focus on themselves first, kind of thinking about the ways that they learn. So one prompt, for example, how well and in what ways do the 4 language skills help you learn? So students might realize that taking notes and writing might be very helpful for them, or speaking things aloud or listening might be more helpful than others. And that could lead us to, in what ways do you rely on these in your own teaching? And the teachers might find that they are using one strategy more than another. And then finally, after they are actively teaching students, how did you allow varied expression and reception while teaching? So for example, in this presentation, you might note that in addition to having the text provided for you, I'm also reading off of the slide for you. So those are two different ways that I'm presenting the information. And now I will turn it over to Karen.
So I really like, Mara, how you were pointing out that in using this conceptual framework, we build in modeling of universal designs for our students. So we're describing all of these different ways that students can interact with information and that they can express what they know. So we actually, this conceptual framework offers an opportunity for modeling. So I wanted to look at the intersection of students with emotional and behavioral needs in elementary general music. And the readings that I was proposing are an article that I wrote with Karen McAvoy that's about the intersection of culturally sustaining practice with trauma-informed pedagogy. Exploring the CASEL.org website. CASEL is an organization that teaches social and emotional learning. Jaegers et al. Wrote an article about transformative social and emotional learning, and their point was that we can't allow social and emotional learning to become normative, so to ignore cultural differences. And then, we can't allow social and emotional learning to ignore cultural differences. And finally, the chapter in Atomic and Darrow's books, Music and Special Education, gives a description of emotional and behavioral disorders, primarily framed from a medical or special education perspective, and offers important information as a starting place for pre-service music educators who often know little about what the labels applied in schools mean and what possibilities are for proactively preventing undesirable behavior and intervening when behavior is challenging. Preserving a child's dignity, keeping children safe, and continuing with learning are the things that we emphasize as important. So then in discussion, I like to ask students to consider what issues are illustrated by the problematic terms special needs and invisible disability. Because again, thinking from a perspective of human dignity, the idea of an invisible disability, invisible to who? Because we are pathologizing the behavior that we're seeing, or we're pathologizing the emotional difference that we're seeing. And then this idea of special needs, as though all of us haven't at some time felt difficulty controlling an emotional response or behaved in a way that was inappropriate for a setting where we were, because maybe we weren't aware of what the expectations were. And then another discussion that's possible is what elements of emotional and behavioral development are subject to culture or gender biases. So again, this idea of culture or gender making right or wrong behavior is a very interesting discussion for students. So then strategies and approaches, allowing students to self-select in and out of activities, having a break signal and a calming corner, specific, explicit expectations that you clarify to students so we don't assume that children know what we want them to do. And then the approaches are a combination of those asset-based pedagogies that we've already discussed in this presentation. In terms of field work, it's important to get students into a place where an expert teacher is utilizing targeted scaffolding for specific student needs, and also universal designs that are intended to proactively help students know what's expected of them and help students be in control. For an assignment, interviewing music teachers and aides about behavior plans, ABC charts, and other IEP 504 requirements for the students with emotional and behavioral needs could be really illuminating for them. I've never done that, but Mara has, and she said it works really well. And finally, in terms of reflections, what preconceptions did I have about the nature of emotional and behavioral needs? Honestly, I think some people think that children are acting out to seek attention, or they have a lot of ideas about why they think people behave in certain ways. And sometimes as a result of these readings, they discover that that's not a very useful way to frame it. And so then asking them to think about what mindsets and skills will I need to cultivate as a result of these things that I know now can be really helpful for them. So in conclusion,
we believe that intersectionality can be a useful lens to consider human difference and meeting learners' needs. We also believe that asset-based pedagogies can help teachers recognize learners' strengths, and that integrating information in courses through reflection, content-specific strategies, and fieldwork can be beneficial. So thank you so much for attending our presentation or watching our presentation today. If you have any questions, do feel free to reach out to us at the emails provided for you here. And then here are our references. Thank you again, and we look forward to talking with you more during the sessions.